Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be doing a tier list for all the civilizations in the Ancient Age, or the Antiquity Age rather, in Civilization 7. There are kind of 3 points we need to make before we get into this. The first of which being is we have played all of these civilizations at least once. However, several of them we have not played more than once. Our sample size is relatively small, and consider this to be more of a timely rather than timeless tier list ranking. We are going to update it over time, and so just consider this kind of a jumping off point where we are going to be discussing each of these civilizations as we go through it for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, their strengths, their disadvantages, and as such, this is going to get into the second point. This is going to be a very long video. It is going to take 1 to 2 hours to get through all the civilizations, and then at the end of that, we will be going into a spreadsheet where we will have a variety of metrics by which we are ranking civilizations and go into the rankings, talking through each category and maybe having an exploration for why we think some civilizations are better than others in various categories. To that end, there are going to be chapters down below that you can use to navigate to particular things if you want to look at a specific thing or understand a specific thing without going through the entire video. It's going to be quite long. And third is just talking in terms of how we are ranking things. For this, we are not considering 100% how strong they are in the Ancient Age. I think that, generally speaking, all of these guys are going to be more than able to get through a game of single-player deity, which is the primary kind of axis upon which we are doing this judgment. We are not doing this judgment for multiplayer, and as such, we are going to be ranking 60% for the Ancient Age and 40% for subsequent later ages, which is to say that if you have a really, really powerful Ancient Age, but you fall off for whatever reason, you're going to get dinged pretty heavily. You're not going to be able to just rest on the fact that you have a really strong advantage, let's say a really strong unique unit, that lets you just kind of run through the age, although unique units are going to be a little bit weaker in general in a deity sort of context. They would be much stronger if you're playing on lower difficulty levels. I'll give 2 examples just kind of at the beginning. If you have kids, please hide them. And by kids, we mean anyone under the age of 38. Put them in the cupboard, put them in the mines, you know where they belong, because we are going to be using a spreadsheet. And the one we wanted to talk about here is the food in particular. Any civilization that has a really good advantage in food in Antiquity is going to be able to grow really fast. When you grow really fast, you're able to use a lot of your resources. You're able to expand out your borders and acquire all the resources within your city limits very, very well. And this is really fast in terms of power spikes. However, if you're already on a very large, population size in most of your cities slash towns, when you transition to the exploration age, you are going to take really a lot longer for your growth events, especially if you've lost whatever food advantage you had from the previous age. And so an example of something that we are going to be generally dinging nations on is going to be, if they are really good at food in Antiquity, we are going to expect them to underperform in exploration, because as you get running in exploration, you are going to not be having as many growth events if you had a lot of growth events in the previous age, because of the way exponential growth works on the food. You don't really lock in your advantage in terms of when you get a growth event, because it's going to take more and more food really scaling up quite quickly until you hit a wall where it's going to take over 50 turns, and functionally if it takes over 50 turns, you're just not getting another growth event. And so this is an example of some way in which you have a disadvantage. A way in which you have an advantage in subsequent ages is there are some buildings that are ageless, that are unique, that are extremely strong, and these are good throughout the exploration age and the modern age. There are also traditions that scale not in a flat way, but rather in a percentage way. These will scale better as well. So for example, getting 5% gold is better than +2 gold in a variety of spots, because percentage has better scaling. And so take this into account, that we are giving a 40% weighting towards its ability to perform in subsequent ages. And so this is going to be really, really heavily informing it, and is probably going to be why I'm going to catch some flack for some of my rankings on the tier list, because I just think that they just don't transition well into later ages. So let's get into it. Alright, so first up we have Aksum, which has a very strong gold advantage advantage, a slight culture advantage, but I think is actually probably the most consistent and smooth civilization out there by utilizing a gold advantage that is apparent both at the very beginning and also at the very end, and also scales well into subsequent ages. So let's take a look at their bonuses a little bit more closely to get a little bit of a feel for them. If you see here, we get +2 gold on resources. Now, this is not only a really good amount of yields over the course of an age, it's going to give you scale up to, by the end of the age, be somewhere between 40 and 100 gold, because this is going to include resources that you do not slot in. You will have at least 20 slottable resources by the end of the age if you're playing kind of properly, and so this is going to scale pretty well. But also, it's really good early on in that you will be able to have the flexibility of, when you are going kind of a standard open with Groma and Golden Sapphire Flowers for the food bloom, getting to 5 pop and going Scout, Scout, Settler, Settler, you will be able to interpose a purchase there really, really early, depending on what your needs are, whether it is not being able to find good locations for a second and third city, so you can buy a scout early, or being able to buy a production building when everyone else is having to rely on the production that is apparent in their own city, and this will get you kind of rolling pretty quickly and have a little bit of explosiveness. In terms of their unique unit, I actually rate the naval abilities or the naval units in Antiquity pretty strongly. If there's a city on a navigable river, you can really, really disrupt the AI. The AI is very poor at making decisions when it comes to fighting on navigable rivers, and this is one of the ways in which you can really, really destroy them despite having that 8 penalty on deity. And so pretty happy to get extra combat strength unit that also it can make trade routes. And so if you're making trade routes and you can make a naval trade route that's reasonable, getting these guys is very powerful. And so you get to double dip, both getting like an economic bonus, and then you can transition this into being able to pursue a victory or legacy point in the military tier tree pretty well towards the end of the age if you already have a couple of DAOs built up. And so this is quite strong. We do have a unique trade ship, cannot be pillaged, with extra trade range, going to be very solid, allow you to make sure that you get resources. It's going to be hard not to golden age in economics, which I do think is kind of the most critical one to golden age. And then we also have the Hawilt. The Hawilt is one of the better improvements that scales into later ages. You don't have anything going on with food though, and so it might be difficult for you to arrange and get your tiles in such a way that you can get as many Hawilts as you would like, but it is going to be very good at giving gold and culture. It has the highest upside out of any of the buildings, and also it's going to give you gold, which is just generally more flexible, and so you will be able to respond to situations really well. Even if other yields might be more powerful, these are going to be more flexible. Taking a closer look at some of the civics, we can see we have a relatively small civic tree, and there's something that's very important to note: its absence from the civic tree. There's no extra settlement limit. You can see here we're 9 out of 6, and so this is one of the disadvantages of Aksum that is worth noting. But coming in here, we will see we have extra resource capacity, makes it so that despite having fewer settlements, we are not going to have any trouble getting enough slots to be able to put in our stuff, as long as it's on navigable rivers. We will have Port of Nations that scales really relatively well as a tradition, but also gold on quarters adjacent to the coast. If we have a lot of coastal stuff, this is going to be pretty good. 2 culture and gold for every active trade route. This is going to be pretty good in the age. It's going to be okay in the next age. The really good scaling for subsequent ages is going to be 15% in cities adjacent to the coast. And you might think, hey, not all my things are going to be cities. I'm going to have some towns. I would rather have 15% gold in a town. Towns generate a lot of gold. The thing about Aksum is Aksum's so explosive with the gold, so consistent with the gold in terms of what's going on, doesn't need any enabling for the gold, that it is probably the easiest civilization to turn every single one of your towns into a city by the end of the age. You can see here in this run we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have 1 non-city, 6. Basically everything that we haven't just conquered or acquired from the enemy is going to be a city, and this is one of the really big strengths. I think that towns are really, really weak overall. You generally want to push cities in general. Aksum is probably the best at transitioning to the next stage with as many cities as possible, especially if you get a kind of late game cheeky little military thing where you take someone's city that has high population at the end. You could even move your capital there get that as a free city, and then use the legacy path on economic to be able to have everything retained as a city in the previous age for the legacy path in Silk Roads here. And so Aksum has a really, really nice transition, and if you are kind of careful about where you settle stuff, you can have a lot of stuff on the coast or adjacent to the coast, and this 15% gold can scale pretty well, especially if you've gone out of your way to put, hawilts on your coastal places and trying to juggle around where stuff is. I will say that the improvements in general, I think, are a little bit weaker than the buildings, not just from some objective sense. They're wildly construction efficient, but because if they're warping your city planning in a way that's not good, then that is a cost that is hard to perceive in terms of the Hawilts. But also, we have here a +2 culture on resources on or adjacent to the coast. This is going to be good in the age, and it will kind of be okay at the beginning of exploration age. The really good scaling one is the 15% gold. But what this will do is, I think that in general, the two more difficult, kind of legacy paths to get are it's difficult to get Golden Age in science, and it's difficult to get one in military. It's difficult to get it in culture and military, rather. And so being able to have some pretty solid cultural advantages early on that just require you going for resources, which is something that you're doing anyways, I think that this is going to be pretty solid for Aksum, and so the extra culture allows you to research the wonders, and then you can build the wonders, and so you're going to be pretty good on the culture. Military is going to be a little bit tough because you will have fewer cities because you don't have as much of a settlement limit, but I think the DAOs can kind of make up that little bit of a penalty, and then you will probably have to go a little out of your way to get science, and then economics should be a breeze. So with all that said, coming back into, our rating system where we're going to put Aksum, we're going to put Aksum all the way in A tier. And keep in mind, or this is something I would like to mention as well, for all of these rankings, we're generally going to try and have a bell curve, and so being in the top or bottom tiers is definitely going to be a little bit more rare, where most of the civilizations are going to be here in B and C tier. Alright, so next up we have Egypt. They have advantages and biases towards navigable rivers. To some extent, if you want to transition into a navigable river civ, Egypt is going to be very, very solid, but I think the one thing that they're good at, and kind of the only thing that they're good at, is ensuring that you get a cultural age legacy path, which, to be fair, I think is probably the hardest one, and so they're probably the easiest civ to quadruple golden age on. But let's take a little bit of a closer look and jump into an Egypt game that we have here. Now, for this, we have a +1 production on navigable rivers. Here's the real problem. We're going to have a bunch of bonuses on navigable rivers. I think in the long term, we kind of don't want to be operating on navigable rivers that much. To some extent, it's okay because they can flood, and if they flood, you're going to have positive variance in this regard, but it's going to be, generally speaking, you want to work production tiles, you want to work woodcutters, and you want to work mines. And I think that food, in a general sense, because of the exponential scaling we mentioned earlier, scales in a really weak way. And so, as a result of this, while we're going to be good in this age, as a result of this river focus, when we transition to the next stage and we lose all these river bonuses, or the river bonuses are going to require us to use a tradition slot, suddenly we're going to feel really, really bad. And so, in particular, we have almost negative scaling, other than the fact that we're going to get wonders, but this is going to be a focus, and this is going to be something we know. We do have a desert bias, and so we will probably have the best pyramids possible. This is something worth noting. Next up, in terms of the unique unit, we have the Magi. It gives +3 combat strength when in friendly territory, double when stationed in a settlement you own. To the extent of being defensive, Egypt is very good, but this unit isn't flexible at all, and I think it might be my least favorite unique unit, or my second least favorite unique unit. It's just not really kind of cutting it all that much, with the exception of defending settlements is really easy with Egypt, and so you can maybe look to push things in a particular way and lean into the Magi's just so that it's hard to take your settlements, this type of thing, but the unit's not going to give you a greater sense of control over the map because it's conditional on being in your friendly territory, and so you don't want to lean into the Magi because it's only useful on defense, and instead it just becomes this way where you're going to have this a little bit of extra added consistency as Egypt. We have the Tajadi. Now, we're not going to go into too great a detail with all these great people, but just note that Tajadi does have a little bit of deviation in that there are ones of these that can rush wonders. I think that as a unique, great person, the Tajadi is probably the best overall, because being able to rush wonders is useful, and this is going to really help you lock in the cultural legacy path. Next up, we have the Necropolis. Now, the Necropolis, I think, is probably good in terms of the quarter bonus to build 1 or 2, or in 1 or 2 cities it's going to really shine. But overall, over the course of an entire game, we're talking starting from Antiquity, going to Modern, the amount of gold per turn that's going to be generated here is going to be really low, and generally speaking, I think your first Necropolis, the one you build in the capital, when you end up kind of following that with 2 to 4 wonders over the course of the age, that Necropolis is going to be really good. All your other Necropolises are just going to kind of be like an ageless building that gets some adjacencies, but the adjacencies are for gold and happiness. Generally, these aren't the best kind of yields, and so overall, as far as unique quarter districts go, I think Egypt has the absolute worst. You can see here we did do the Groma Golden Sapphire Flowers start for this game, and had a pretty explosive start where we were able to settle quite a lot, but let's jump into taking a look at the civics. We're going to have a relatively small civic tree, which is nice because we can get through it relatively quickly, where we are going to unlock our buildings. Minor rivers do not end unit movement. Tactically speaking, this might be more useful in multiplayer. It does allow you to abuse rivers and fight around rivers in a way that is asymmetric and hard to kind of counter if you were playing against a human opponent. We also get food on navigable rivers, which is going to let you kind of come out the gate a little bit faster, alongside finishing your quarter, getting you a boost of gold will kind of let you snowball. It'll be a bit of a mini snowball push. Magi generate 1 gold when stationed in a settlement you own, is not that great. This really here is Riches of the Duat is kind of the crown jewel of Egypt's scaling, which is the plus 15% production towards constructing wonders. In subsequent ages, this bonus isn't even as good as other civilizations' bonuses for specifically producing wonders, but this is going to be one of the better traditions in the aggregate sense. And then coming over here, we do have our +1 settlement limit, which is always nice to have, and +1 culture on navigable rivers in terms of a tile. This is going to, again, shoehorn you into working navigable rivers, or just not really having a tradition that scales particularly well. And so, jumping back into taking a look at Egypt, we are going to put Egypt firmly, and I mean quite firmly, into D tier. They can get some stuff done. They're kind of a little bit balanced. You have some extra juice, but functionally there's like no power here. Just the consistency of being able to legacy path very, very consistently on the culture path. But other than that, there's really not stuff to write home about, and negative scaling into future ages does hold Egypt back quite a bit. So next up we have Greece, which is overall fairly solid as a civilization, but where it's really going to shine is if you are leaning into some sort of strategy that is either going to be endeavor focused, in some way positively diplomatically focused, or focused on generating city-states with a particular edge towards a city-state generation. So let's take a little bit of a look at a game that we have here with Greece, where we are going to be taking a look at, right off the bat, the plus influence on the palace. Actually incredibly strong. Influence is kind of a hard yield to get. This will generate you plus 30% influence. Really good if you want to get the ball rolling towards accepting any type of agreements, and also suzeraining someone as quickly as possible. It's going to be good to both. It's going to be flexible, and this is one of the strongest yields in terms of what you get right from the open. And I think it's strong from the perspective of influence is maybe not super strong in the first 20 turns, right? But you will hit this inflection point where the influence feels really good and allows you to play nice with everyone or go for city-states, depending on what you happen to roll, or a little bit of both. Coming in, the Hoplite is going to be a unique unit that replaces the Warrior. It is going to have quite a bit of combat strength, +2 if it's adjacent to another Hoplite, which is easily enough to accomplish, and also there will be in the civics tree something you can get, or the unique civics tree, something you can get to give +1 combat strength per city-state you're a suzerain of. If you get this, and you get maybe 4 to 6 city-states as suzerains, this is great, but if you choose a military city-state and you choose plus combat towards infantry, you will get double this value effectively, so you can easily, or fairly easily, get +10 to 16 combat on hoplite if you are specifically focusing on city-stating as many suzerains, or suzeraining as many city-states as possible. So this will be a very flexible unit, but even in like the worst of conditions, you're going to be able to get just a little bit of combat strength even if you don't go for any Suzes, and instead you're playing nice with the rest of the world, so this is pretty good. The Logios, we're not going to go into too big a detail, but there are a lot of these guys that improve yields on particular buildings, and so this is going to be kind of okay. The Acropolis is one of the kind of it's a middling version of a unique quarter, but all the unique quarters are good. They're also in particular good in Antiquity because you can put specialists in them, and the specialists will transition into the next age. And in terms of adjacencies for those specialists, we have culture adjacencies. So you can get something like a +5 per specialist fairly easy, and then put them in for the next age, and so this is going to feel pretty good. You get +2 gold per on the Parthenon for each city-state you're a suzerain of, and if you lean into city-states, this can be +12 gold in Antiquity, and then plus 20-something gold in the next age, and then 20-something gold in the final age if you are really proactive about maintaining your suzerains and this type of thing. And so this does scale kind of okay. Gold, or that amount of gold, kind of is falling off relative to what you're getting done. Is probably the strongest in Antiquity or the beginning of Exploration Age, but this is going to be something that is decently scaling on top of giving you the extra happiness. In particular, the Parthenon, considering how hard influence is to get in Antiquity, and you can't have any influence already stored up from the previous age rolling into it to get your city-state started, this type of stuff, the Parthenon's going to be really good with the base 2 influence if placed on rough terrain, but this requirement to be placed on rough terrain is a significant constraint and will cause and warp the way in which you settle your cities a little bit. Let's take a closer look at some of the civics here that we have for the Greeks. We have a little bit of a kind of medium to large size tree, considering we have 2 or 3 masteries rather. We are going to gain extra influence towards initiating the Befriend independent project. You can get another 50% out of the diplomatic attribute tree, and you will be wanting to do probably both of these if you want a city-state focused strategy. So again, Greece is really going to be powerful with the city-state focus, as it's going to be able to get those city-states for much cheaper all throughout multiple ages. +2 culture for active endeavors, sanctions, and projects you started or supported. So even if you don't go city-state, if you just want to go diplomatically oriented, let's say you have a leader that really benefits for this. For example, Himiko, which can freely accept other cultures' endeavors. This would be really good for Himiko. Himiko has great science. Then you get all the culture for accepting all your agreements. You get to play nice with everyone, and then you get to also go for the suzerains, because accepting the endeavor doesn't cost you any influence, and so you end up having a lot of influence for working with to do everything. And so that's like an example of a leader that might reasonably make sense. Also, Tecumseh is probably the best with Greece, given that he gets +1 combat per city-state you're a suzerain of, and then +1 food and production per age per city-state you're a suzerain of. So if you have 12 in the modern age, that's +36 food and production in all your settlements. And so that is probably the best pairing with Greece when you will eventually transition to the later ages and help to enable Tecumseh's bonus. Here we have the Parthenon and also Army Commander experience. I don't think this Strategoy is very good, but it does kind of scale into the later ages in the sense that it's never going to be terrible in the way that a lot of traditions are terrible. And then here it is, the hoplites gain +1 combat strength for each city-state you're a suzerain of. You can, get an additional one of this bonus from the suzeraining someone by itself, if you suzerain a military guy. And then if you're playing Tecumseh, you can get this once over. And then if you're playing also further, further, if you're playing with the memento that gives +1 combat strength per city-state you're a suzerain of, you can end up getting 4 times this multiplier. And so if you have 6 suzerains, you can have +24 combat strength. It does get a little bit nutty if you want to lean into it and go ham in the early age, which kind of makes sense considering I think that going for a memento rather than the food bloom, but one that gives you influence, is reasonable on Greece if you're going for a strategy like this. And so you could just go for the 24 combat strength. Here we also get +2 culture for each city-state you're a suzerain of. Fantastic. This is going to be nice. +1 settlement limit, so check the box that we are getting a settlement limit. And then we get extra influence towards initiating... let's see if we can get a better look at this, towards initiating endeavors and sanctions, and so this is going to be good. All in all, kind of coming back into the browser here, Greece is going to be a very solid pick. In specific, they are going to have a lot of their power level kind of gated behind the fact that they are really, really good if you're doing a city-state focus, and other than that, they are maybe kind of C-ish tier, but we would put them in B tier as a very, very solid pick, and they're pretty solid even if you don't want to do some suzerain nonsense. I have to kind of think on this and reflect on this, but it might be the case that... So, currently, actually, there's maybe a little bit of a discussion to be had in regards to Greece and what the metagame regarding influence is. Because currently, I think the influence metagame, it's in the Antiquity Age specifically, it seems like it's better to not go for suzerains and instead to go for using a lot of espionage, because that will generate you the most yields possible. However, in terms of transitioning to subsequent ages, I think getting suzerains and getting suzerains repeatedly is really, really powerful in exploration and modern age, and so you won't get to feel the full strength of Greece, I think, in Antiquity, and a lot of their strength is also in the transition. If you're thinking just Antiquity strength and also not necessarily going for a city-state focus, then they're like C or D tier, right? But it is with all these considerations, the really strong transition, the really strong synergy with going city-state focus, that I think brings it up to B tier. But the question is what is the metagame in regards to influence? My sample size isn't big enough to know. If it's going for city-states, then Greece absolutely should be in like A tier. But if it's not going for city-states and it's that city-states are just bad, he's probably Greece is maybe in C tier, something like this. But this is something to consider, and just know that the city-states is a huge axis upon Greece's what is it? You give me a lever and I'll move the world. It's a huge axis upon whether or not Greece is good is highly dependent on whether or not city-stating in general is good, and I'm not 100% sure I have the answer to this question. I suspect that people are sleeping on suzeraining people a little bit because it gets better in later ages, and so since you don't feel it in the age where you do it, it's maybe a little bit hard to appreciate the full power. But we're going to put them in B tier, at least for now, with our current knowledge of the metagame. So next up, we have Han. Now, Han is kind of the most balanced feeling civilization that we have, that in terms of its advantages, none of them are... It's just kind of solid at a whole bunch of things and feels, generally speaking, pretty flexible and also pretty consistent. And so it's pretty hard to like knock anything of them or really be like, wow, this is the greatest ever. In particular, they are good at science and influence. And so if you were looking for kind of the other influence-oriented civilization alongside the Greeks, it would be the Han. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at them jumping into game. Now, we don't have the recording or save of that's in a easy accessible file of our kind of one of our Han games, but taking a look at the Han Empire here, the capital and new towns gain an additional population with their first growth event. Fantastic. This is going to give you a little bit of explosiveness coming out the gate. The first growth event is the least or is in some ways the least valuable and the most valuable. It's going to be like the least valuable in the sense that it requires the least food to achieve, but it's going to be really valuable in the sense that it will allow you to grab tiles really quickly, grab resources up really quickly, and getting this in the capital is going to mean that you are able to, relatively speaking, get a good amount more settlement a little bit faster. And so this is going to be pretty solid. It does count, as far as I know, towards your growth events, so it is not just a +1 population cap type of thing in terms of how things go. But if I'm mistaken in that, Han Empire needs to be way higher than where I'm going to put it, but this is going to be just a very solid production towards the Wei Yang Palace. Wei Yang Palace gives +6 influence. It's kind of a solid scaling wonder. Next up, we have the Chukanu, and the Chukanu, in general, I think that the best unit class to have is going to be Archer in terms of a unique unit. It has a zone of control and a higher defensive strength, +5 combat strength when attacking adjacent units. You will have an eventual Civic that gives you +5 combat strength, I think, when defending against attacks, something like this. And so the Chukanu is just going to be very solid. You can spam them. They can kind of get up in the melee a little bit, but it is also going to be very good in the early game because it is not gated behind later tech. You get it when you unlock Slinger, and so you're going to have it readily available. We're not going to really comment on Shi Dafu. It's just kind of a lot of generic ones of these, but it does require at least 10 population, and so that is something. And then the Great Wall is one of the better unique buildings. In fact, I think it's the most cost efficient. If you're assuming that you have 1.5 adjacencies, it will give 2 culture, which is pretty solid. But I think in terms of where you want to place them, it's maybe a little bit awkward to get a nice stretching wall unless you build around it really, really well. But this will give you a bit of a culture focus to go along with your science focus, and so this is one of the reasons why the Han feels particularly balanced, is because they have science, they have culture, they have influence, they have kind of the higher importance yields, while a little bit less focused on the production and the food. Coming in to take a closer look at some of their civics here, we have Ji, which unlocks the Great Wall relatively early, and this is something that is important to focus in on, is the +1 settlement limit is earlier for the Han than it is anyone else in the tree. They get it on the very first thing that they get, and so this is pretty good. Science buildings gain a +1 adjacency for quarters. You're not necessarily building that many quarters, so I'm not sure how much science you get out of this, but this is nice. It's not a tradition. Up here we have +2 influence on the palace. Great if you were doing some sort of influence strategy, and it's going to be flexible. And +1 influence on a tradition on science buildings. This is going to be relatively good into later ages, especially if you're doing a strategy where you are going to have science buildings in some of the later age unique buildings. So if you're going to have a unique district that is science oriented in the next age, this is going to mean that you will get up to, in each city, 3 influence. And so that's quite a big amount, but you're not as explosive as Greece because you don't have the 50% discount when it comes to city stating people, but it's still going to be solid if you wanted to go into that type of strategy. Here's the +5 combat strength when defending on the Chukanu, and +1 influence on happiness buildings. So if you have a combination of happiness and science buildings, you can start getting a lot of influence yields here. And so this is a good one to note. And then here, this is not going to scale all that well, but 10% science in the capital is a percentage kind of modifier here. And so if you push a lot in your capital in terms of getting specialists there with the Tianxia, this is going to be relatively good. But Tianxia itself is going to be modest kind of scaling in terms of what you are going to be able to use in later ages. +1 science from specialists as you get more and more science, or as more and more specialists and you lean into specialists. This will give you a little bit more benefit, but you do get from ideology way better cards to slot in. So unless you're having a lot of happiness and celebrating a lot, or having extra social policy slots in some way or form, it's maybe going to get lost in the sauce in the modern age, but be reasonably solid in kind of the exploration age, especially if you get a lot of growth done. If you decide to be a little bit more food focused in the early age and actually go for specialists in antiquity. But I think going for specialists when you have a tile improvement rather than a quarter as your unique building is maybe a little bit of a miss. So jumping back into it, we are going to put the Han Empire smack dab actually in the middle of the ratings, right behind Greece. Just very solid, does a lot of things well. You can probably just play almost any combination with a Han, being that it will perform well in culture, science, and influence all together, and so plus a little bit of happiness, so that's always nice to have. Alright, so next up we have the Khmer, which is probably a civ I'm going to catch a lot of flack for in terms of my evaluation, but the Khmer is all about food. Food. Also floodable rivers. And so this is the primary thing to write home about. You do get to get your population really high as long as you can have floodplain tiles in the cities. So you do have a settling constraint. But as I mentioned earlier, spreadsheet warning, we generally think that food is really weak because of how you hit a wall eventually. You grow a bunch, then you hit a wall. So Khmer is going to be really good at getting really high pop places, and is going to be decently scaling at getting those places and pushing the pop a little bit higher, even in later ages. But I do think that any sort of advantage you get in Antiquity falls off really hard with the Khmer as you transition into later ages. And so let's take a little bit of a closer look, but I'm guessing you can think or infer where we are going to be putting them. So coming into game here, we do have a Ben Franklin game we played with Khmer, who incidentally I think pairs pretty well with Khmer if you're determined to play it. But we have districts on rivers do not remove the natural yield of the tile. This is a really explosive thing to have, and to the extent the Khmer are good, a lot of it is on the back of this, because this is going to make it so that if you can settle on rivers really consistently, and then just plop down a bunch of districts on those rivers, you will get a ton of food yields. This is really, really, really impressive to watch, but I don't think it scales that well. Next up, we have the elephant unit. I don't know how to pronounce this. Apologies to people who share this culture. The Yuthana something. But we will have the Khmer unique cavalry unit. Higher combat strength, but slower movement. Immune to flood damage. Ignores zone of control. And when we played this, we were a little bit less sold on it. But after having to fight these things, when they are coming from the deity side of stuff, despite having enormous combat advantages, we struggled so hard to beat these things. They definitely pack a really heavy punch, just in terms of what they're getting in terms of base combat. But I do think that there are better cavalry units in this age, and so maybe not necessarily the thing to write home about, but they do hurt pretty bad. Next up, we have their unique merchant. They can establish trade route to import resources from foreign settlement. They're immune to flood damage, and they ignore movement penalties from wet terrain. You'll get to get your trade in a little bit faster. That is a non-zero thing. But next up we have the beret. Now the beret is pretty interesting. +3 food, +1 food for all floodplains in the settlement. This has this weird sort of scaling where the more you are utilizing Khmer in the early age, the less useful this will be later on, because if you place a bunch of districts on rivers and those rivers are floodplains, they're not going to be useful in the later ages. But in terms of, unless this just adds I'm not 100% sure if in the later age this adds food, even if it's on a district. But I feel like this doesn't add food on the floodplain tile unless you're working it. I guess I'm not 100% sure, and we would rate Khmer slightly higher if this food transitions, even if there's a district built atop it, but I think that it bricks it. I'm not 100% sure, but it's not going to affect fundamentally where our eventual rating is for them. But taking a closer look at Khmer, you also notice we didn't finish the game with Khmer because we were already feeling slowed down, and so I felt like we kind of already knew what was going on with them. But we will have the beret that we get early on. Improvements in districts do not get pillaged by floods, and combat strength for units on floodplains. Very conditional, as a combat strength bonus, doesn't really scale that well. Here we have these guys get +1 movement, that is our cavalry unit, and +1 gold from specialist. The +1 gold from specialist has okay scaling. Angor Wat is kind of good if you want to push specialists in the ancient age, which is kind of what they're trying to incentivize you to do, but I think it's actively bad. Next up, we have this civic here, which gives +50% growth rate in the capital and -5 happiness in every other city. I think the metagame is to push cities. I think towns are bad, and I think that this thing is actively bad. This civic itself is actively bad. Not the tradition, but the civic itself, I think, is actively bad to the extent that you probably want to not research this until later on. I think that you want to upgrade things to cities. The -5 happiness in every other city is just probably not worth the 50% growth rate in the capital because of the way that growth works, which we're not going to cover extensively. If you want to go to the spreadsheet, you can go to the spreadsheet. We have a video linked into it where we describe it and talk about it, but +50% is not, it is a multiplicative modifier. multiplicative modifiers don't overcome exponential modifiers very effectively. What this ends up being is effectively 2.5 extra pop in the capital in terms of how long it takes before you hit the wall where it's going to take 50 turns to grow. 2.5 extra pops is not worth minus 20 happiness or something like this because you have 4 other cities. It's just not. But plus 100% food and happiness towards maintaining specialists. This is okay. This kind of scales decently into the modern age. It's maybe one you want to consider if you're not going communist as your ideology, and you might have a little bit of difficulty, and also food kind of gets a little bit better in the modern age. On the mastery, we have plus 3 codex slots in the palace. Probably not necessary, but if you're intentionally keeping not a lot of towns, which I think is bad, this will be useful to the extent that you need slots in order to be able to golden. I think that you probably don't research this, and you probably research this before the end of the age so that you can unlock the tradition for yourself for subsequent ages. But let's jump back into the browser, and I think you can kind of guess we weren't trying to keep it a secret. We're going to put Khmer into F tier. It's not the very worst, though. I do think that, you know, the explosiveness of Khmer, it's definitely explosive in the sense that you get to push a lot of food, and it looks really impressive when you're doing it, but I just don't think it scales that well, and I don't think they have, like, advantages for... I mean, I guess they get to work the tiles, like, a bit faster. They're going to be more explosive than, for example, Han, getting their extra growth, because the working on rivers thing, but the constraint of needing to settle on rivers is a significant constraint as well, and so I think if it's warping your stuff so that you're doing bad settles, this isn't what you want to do, and it doesn't justify it, and so we're gonna put the Khmer here in F tier. Alright, so next up we are going to have Maruya, which is going to be, have a little bit of balance in that it's going to both enable a little bit of culture and science, but what it's really about is happiness, and this is probably the civilization that is most polarized in terms of its synergistic strategies, which means it's going to be very, very, very good if you are synergizing with anything that enables or benefits from happiness or celebrations or this type of thing. Specifically, happiness is a little bit better than celebration enabling, because at a certain point marginal happiness doesn't add more celebrations because you need to celebrate for 10 turns before you can start another one. If you could start another one immediately and just chain extra time and get the benefit from starting one, it would be even better, but at a certain point extra happiness is not useful for more celebrations. But with someone with either of the Ashokas, for example, which scale off of happiness, just the raw attribute, it doesn't matter if you're not enabling more celebrations, you're still getting double dipping effects from happiness. Incidentally, there is maybe some metagame that I am appreciating how valuable it is, which is the ability to stack a bunch of happiness modifiers in Antiquity, and then in Exploration Age and also in Modern Age, push settlement limit really hard and go over a settlement limit because you have so much happiness already stacked. This is something to consider, but we are going to be rating things. Now, before we get into this, we need to discuss a spreadsheet thing. So hide your kids, because in particular, coming in on Antiquity buildings, technically this ageless stuff, this is incorrect, but in terms of when you are in the Age of Antiquity, one of the most efficient buildings you can build is going to be the altar. The very first thing that the Maruya give, as we're going to jump into game right here, and so take a look at them, is going to be they get an additional pick of a pantheon when unlocking mysticism. So the fact that you are going to get 2 altar bonuses makes the already one of the best buildings to spam even better, and this is what carries Maruya in terms of its general strength, independent of a focus on happiness, is that the very strongest building in terms of generic buildings, or the second strongest building in terms of generic buildings, I can't remember if Monument is slightly better, is going to be way, way, way better on them, like maybe 50% better, actually probably 60% better. It's going to be really strong, and so this is going to allow you to go God of the Sun and also City Patron Goddess, and also maybe you are even supposed to specifically, instead of doing a food bloom with Maruya, do a culture bloom so that you can lock in the pantheons that you want. This is where you get a culture attribute point at the start, and the other memento that gives you plus 50 culture every time you use an attribute point. Here, this was one of our early runs, and so we just have Diplo and cultural attribute point. But jumping into kind of more of the stuff, we have a unique unit, +5 combat strength against fortified districts, ignores zone of control. I don't think this is anything to write home about, but it does do non-zero. We have the unique settler, capable of founding new cities, adds 2 happiness on city halls. This is going to be solid. It's not anything crazy, but it is solid. And then here is going to be kind of the pride and joy of the happiness scaling, which is going to be you have a unique quarter that gives plus 10% happiness in the settlement. That is a lot of happiness, or can scale to be a lot of happiness, especially if you're pairing it with something like Ashoka, who has plus 1 happiness adjacency for all improvements. You will really be able to stack quite a lot of happiness. You can see here at the end of the Ancient Age, back in like our 2nd or 3rd run, plus 220 happiness. That is quite a lot. We do have this district which is going to have science and culture adjacencies, which is a pretty nice pairing because this means you can put specialists in it relatively early. Those specialists will be good all throughout every single age because it's always turned on because it's a ageless building. And so in terms of your specialist adjacencies, this is one of the better ones. Getting science and culture, it's a nice balance. It goes well. And so this is going to be particularly good. Let's take a look at the civics here because the traditions for Maruya are quite strong. Here we have both of our buildings are unlocked in the same civic, which is going to be really nice. Plus 3 happiness on science buildings is also going to be nice, and it is going to scale well, obviously, if you have a happiness synergy or a happiness type of thing you're leaning into. If you're not leaning into happiness, this is probably overkill to get happiness on science buildings, but okay. Next up, we have units next to these guys heal an additional 5 a turn. This is pretty solid. It allows you to siege down. This is their unique unit, if I recall correctly, the military one. And so this is going to be solid enough. And I don't know if this scales with multiples. If it scales with multiples, then that could get out of hand really quickly. But we also have plus 1 gold for every 5 surplus happiness in cities. This is pretty good. If you take a look at how much happiness we're getting here, how much gold we are going to be getting from this at 220 happiness, right, is going to be 44. This is pretty strong as a gold bonus if you are scaling happiness. If you're not scaling happiness, it's going to be a lot more modest. But if you are scaling happiness, again, it's going to be bananas, B-A-N-A-N-A-S. But keeping in mind that this makes every happiness worth 20% of a gold, it's still going to be better in terms of generating gold to generate gold rather than happiness. This is something that I think people forget about with scaling, and they keep pushing the things so it scales into other things, but in reality just getting the other things can sometimes be more efficient. If you're generating a celebration every 10 turns and you don't have any benefit from happiness scaling, building a happiness building to lead into the Shreni is going to actually be like bad because it's going to have more gold upkeep than gold you're getting from the building, right? But again, if you're going happiness, incredibly strong. Here we have plus 4 happiness on military buildings, again, tradition, and infantry and cavalry units getting plus 3 combat strength when adjacent to each other. A little bit of some mixed arms reward here. It's going to be kind of a modest military improvement, but nothing too crazy. And here we are going to have 10% to all yields and settlements not founded by you. This is kind of the Ashoka balance, and the plus 1 settlement limit, pretty late in the tree, but okay. We will also gain plus 1 science for every 5 surplus happiness in cities. This is a lot better. Science is, generally speaking, in exploration at least, and also in antiquity, a much better yield than gold is. I'm not really sure if gold becomes better in modern. This will require a little bit more thought, but this is going to be a very, very nice tradition. And so overall, with a complete kind of strategy and thing that you're trying to execute, if you lean into happiness, these traditions are insane and will stay insane all throughout the run. If you're not leaning into happiness, they're still fairly solid, and so this is going to be, especially if you get like negative on happiness, and it's a way you can manage things, and you're going to be very strong, in particular in an explosive way as a result of your altars being very good with Maruya. So coming back into the browser, we are going to put Maruya. I really struggled quite a lot with where to put Maruya. And the idea is I struggled between the top of B tier or the back of A tier. I struggled quite a bit. I think we're going to put them at the top of B tier with a very heavy-handed asterisk that if you have some sort of payoff in either your memento strategy or your leader for happiness, it's obviously going to be A, and it's not only going to be A, it's going to be at the top of A tier. But if you don't have that type of thing, I think it's not quite there with the other A tier civs, and so we're going to have it at the very top of B tier, where even if you aren't leaning happiness, I do think it is going to be quite solid, but maybe not transition all that well if you can't make use of the traditions and the happiness focus. But if you can, it's going to be quite strong. I know that we just covered Maruya and Khmer, but the real elephant in the room here is I think the most poorly balanced civ, which is going to be the Meier. And so we're just going to slot it into S tier, and then we're going to talk about it. Every single other one, we're going to do this like little tease where we're going to pretend like we're going to maybe put it somewhere else, except for Khmer, because it was obvious we didn't think much of Khmer from the start. But we're going to just put the Meier in S tier, and also declare this is the only S tier civ because there's no civ anywhere near Meier. And so let's talk about it. Let's jump in. So, pretty unambiguously, the really big thing to talk about is their unique district, but we're going to go in order. The palace gaining +5 science for adjacent vegetated terrain. This can be pretty nice. Getting an additional 10% science in the very early ages or portions of the game can be particularly good. I think this opens up Meier for alternative strategies from Memento, rather than just going for the food and growth in order to get to size 5 as quickly as possible. To go scout, settler. I think the fact that you're getting extra science maybe makes it so you can go scout, production building, settler, and also coming into talking about the unique units, the Jaguar Slayer is your unique scout, and it gains combat strength, and it has 25 damage, and it can also place a Jaguar trap that's invisible, and it will deal damage and end movement. This recharges 5 turns after placing a trap. This is an incredible unit, especially if you want to sweat placing traps everywhere, such that you could even reasonably go scout, settler is a lot more, I don't want to say, it's going to be a lot more consistent. If you're pretty aggressive with re-rolling maps or re-rolling games, this is less of a consideration. But if you're thinking of the context in multiplayer, being able to go multiple scouts and then have those scouts be able to do combat and then also be able to gum up stuff with a bunch of traps is just absolutely wild and insane. And this gives the Meier so much map control when paired with the Huelche, which, unless I am mistaken, does get unlocked when they get Slinger. And if they get unlocked when you get Slinger, normally, this is just absolutely incredible, because this is one of the better, I think it's best to have combat strength in the archers, generally speaking. I don't think any of them have extra combat strength, except for the Han one gets extra combat strength with stuff adjacent to it. They just have sort of other advantages, but can see through vegetation and ignores movement penalties from vegetated terrain. This means if you have like forest battle lines, you can have asymmetry when you can fire at people who can't fire back because you can see through the terrain. This is quite nice. It's quite nice to have the extra movement through there, and so that is going to be pretty good. But coming in, the elephant in the room is, of course, the unique quarter of them. The Awayable Coup, not sure how it's pronounced, but this thing is insane. Every time you research a technology, this settlement gains production equal to 15% of its cost. Now, production overflows, so if you overshoot the production by any amount, it'll just roll over to the next thing you build. It's important to note, this quarter gets worse if you play on online speed. If you play on speeds that are faster than standard, this quarter gets worse, but as it stands right here, you're effectively gaining 15% of your science yield as production. We are still in the ancient age here with 167 production. It's effectively giving us a low 20s worth of production in the cities that have this quarter. That is nuts. And not only is it nuts, it scales into the next ages. It's not like having 20 production on the building, which would be nuts in its own right, but it would fall off. When you have 300 production, it's going to be, or 300 science, it's going to be 45 production. When you have 600 science, it's going to be 90 production equivalent. You will be able to just one-shot everything that you build, including wonders, from the overflow that you're getting. This building is nuts. It would still be nuts. It would still be nuts even if there allow cards outside. It would be nuts if it was a third of the value it currently is. It's just absolutely bananas, but also nuts. And so let's move on from that. But this is where the biscuit is. But even without this, Maya would be really good. Maya would still be like A tier even without this. But this just absolutely pushes it so far. Okay, coming in. We also have this +3 happiness and science adjacency for quarters and wonders, and also science adjacency for quarters and wonders. Not only do we have really nice quarter bonus, we actually have really good unique buildings in that they are giving adjacencies that are really good for early placing specialists, gaining from both culture and science, fantastic. And also the Kuna specifically overall is going to have an enormous amount of science because you're usually going to be able to place it on vegetation, and so 6 base science is absolutely incredible. And also +3 happiness in terms of a pairing of 2 of these. 6 science, 3 happiness, really good. The 3 happiness is not as good as, you know, the 6 science, but this is just going to be absolutely insane. And that's like, we don't even need to get into the other stuff, but the other stuff is also good. And so let's view the tree here and look at the Mayan civics. We are going to have, the only thing that they aren't like doing is just being super explosive basically, in terms of the Maya, but they scale just insanely well into later ages in a way that's like, and they are also really strong in the age that they're in because they have combat scouts and the archers, and they'll just be remarkably smooth. And so here we have the Huelche and Jaguar Slayers gain stealth and vegetated terrain. Nice. We have all units gain the poison ability, +3 combat strength against wounded units. As far as combat traditions go, this is one of the best scaling ones because 3 combat strength that is semi-conditional but really not that hard to achieve is going to be good. Next up, we have the Reign of Shock, which is going to give the altar gains +1 science adjacency from vegetated terrain. The altar already is one of the best buildings to build. Science is a really good yield in the early game. This is going to let you push science really hard very early on, but you are going to have to build around vegetated terrain. We also get +1 science on vegetated terrain in cities. If you have a lot of vegetated terrain, or your first 2 to 3 cities are going to be really good in this regard, then you're going to kind of run out of vegetated terrain a little bit, but this is going to be just incredibly strong because you're going to be able to push the science really early, but culture is probably a little bit better in Antiquity, with the idea that the legacy path is a little bit harder to get to, but okay, we're getting to it. After researching a technology, gain 10% of culture equal to its cost. This is going to help you out to be able to push in the Ancient Age for getting the culture civics faster so that you can start working on the wonders, although how fast you start working on the wonders is a little bit trivial when you can gain, you know, 15 to 20 production a turn in the Ancient Age off of your science overflow and when you research stuff. Coming in here, we do get the +1 settlement limit, nice, and plus science and culture on happiness buildings. This is going to scale relatively well if you are looking to build a lot of happiness buildings. It's going to be pretty solid. It's not insane, but the scaling into later ages, you're not looking at this. You're looking at the absurd quarter that you are getting off the Mayans. They could just give it 15 production and it would just be worse. Well, maybe it wouldn't be worse because it'd be way better early on if it had 15 production. But it'd be way better in Antiquity, but it would scale worse, obviously, with 15 production. But this thing is just, this is the reason, and it's S tier, and it is unambiguously, even if there was something else that belonged in S tier, this would still be the only thing in S tier, because we just need to differentiate that hard between the Maya and everything else, and I think it's unbalanced, and I think it'll get nerfed, and it's just, I think anyone who thinks that Maya aren't the best Civ just aren't thinking of Ages Beyond Antiquity, and they're just only thinking, oh, like, this thing pops off really hard in Antiquity, but there's nothing that has anything close to that amount of production and that ability to lock down wonders, as well as just spam units, especially if you're playing not on the fastest game speed. If you're on the fastest game speed, I don't know how to evaluate it, but it'll be a little bit worse. But yeah, we'll stop shaking our fists at the air over Maya being S tier. Alright, so next up we have a civilization that I think that people are going to generally disagree with me on, and that is going to be the Mississippians. The Mississippians in particular have a very, very strong food advantage. They're very explosive. They have a very good, unique unit. That's kind of what they have going on for them. They have reasonable advantages in production and gold, but I think that a lot of what they're doing just doesn't scale well into subsequent ages, other than the fact that they're going to deliver you into the exploration age with cities and towns that have high population and also a decent chunk of gold. And in particular, we want to mention you're probably going to have a slightly higher than normal amount of cities, and that this is going to be kind of what they leave you for future ages, is a little bit of a head start in exploration that does fall off because of the nature of food and growth. So let's jump into game and take a little bit of a look at the Mississippians. We are going to get all buildings receive +1 food adjacency for resources. Incidentally, I do think that these food civilizations in general do open up the alternative for moving away from the bloom start. I think the bloom start is still going to be good, where you go for Groma plus the extra golden sapphire flowers, allowing you to get to size 5 and go scout, scout, settler, settler in terms of your open. You could maybe go for something where you are trying to get buildings faster, maybe go Benjamin Franklin, who builds faster production buildings, and you look to get production buildings and then get food and something like this, and then you go for a science bloom where you're getting the science attribute point and +50 science per science attribute point you spend. This might be reasonable, and the speed by which you slow down is compensated really heavily by the Mississippians being so explosive. They're either the most explosive or the second most explosive, depending on how you look at it, I think. I think they're probably second. Coming up, we also have the Burning Arrow. Now, the Burning Arrow is probably the best archer unit in Antiquity, and I generally think that having a nice archer unit is kind of best, but the archer units just don't get huge bonuses in the same way other ones do, but the Burning Arrow will be solid. I probably need to test this a little bit more, and I'm generally, as a bit of a disclaimer, less confident in my opinions regarding military in games in general, because to me, you have a bigger stick by growing a bigger economy and other stuff, and just having more units is generally an easy way to approach it rather than having the slightly better unit. But continuing on, we do have the unique merchant that will kind of refund itself when it is your first or second merchant, and after that it will just be getting a discount by the gaining 25 gold per resource when creating a new trade unit. This can be useful for getting things going, starting to gain some extra gold, some extra yields. And then we have the Pock Top here. The Pock Top gains +1 gold and also +1 food for each adjacent resource. This doesn't stack with this bonus, just to be clear, but it is going to be, as an improvement, gaining +1 adjacent food for every resource. It is also ageless. It does have a very significant drawback in that it has to be on flat terrain, but the production cost of the Pock Top is very, very low. And so you can push these even knowing you're going to delete them, with the idea that you generate enough gold and food over the course of Antiquity or later ages that you don't really care that you build over them. The flat terrain tile is a significant one, though, because generally speaking, first of all, you can't build this over resources. A lot of the tiles you want to be working are going to be resources, and you can't build this over mines. A lot of the tiles you want to work are going to be production-oriented tiles, which is mines and woodcutters. So you can build it over woodcutters, you can build it over clay pits, I believe. I'm not 100% sure if you can build it over quarries, but the main idea is going to be that it is somewhat restrictive in terms of where you can place it. It is pretty explosive. You can place it and then build over it later. Maybe this is going to be part of the strategy for being a little bit more explosive, but I do think it is going to be pretty good in the in the Antiquity age. I think this is a very poor scaling building, and it is not going to be good at the end of the Antiquity age either, because of the way that it's going to bring you to kind of the soft wall of food really fast, and then you're going to stall out there. And then once you start at the soft wall for food in Exploration Age, it's going to, again, be harder to grow and get those specialists and this type of stuff when you hit the Exploration Age, or you're not going to have the experience of as much growth in the exploration age here. Now let's take a look at what you have in terms of the civics. Probably the most important one is going to be the extra production towards buildings when you are constructing them that you get really early. This is going to be pretty solid. It is going to be a little bit subtle, but this is a strong bonus to be had. You don't have anything else that gives production, but this is solid enough. You also are going to get the +1 settlement limit kind of early-ish, and it's going to be nice with the all buildings receive +1 gold adjacency for resources. I don't think this is as strong as Aksum's +2 gold on resources, but I do think that this is still pretty good. It doesn't require that you improve the resources. I think that this is one of the ways in which you can transition into a good age is making sure you have more cities if possible, even though your traditions overall aren't going to be that great. I think that as a tradition this doesn't really scale that well, but it's going to be non-zero as a tradition. Next up we have +4 combat strength for ranged units when defending. In general, you kind of don't want your ranged units to be eating combat anyways, and so if this is useful, this means something's probably going wrong. But burning arrows can pillage within 2 tiles for 1 movement. This is probably good in multiplayer. I don't think it's really... I mean, it means you can heal easier and this type of stuff, but I don't think it's overall too incredible. And then we have the Kanaha, which is going to give plus resource capacity in the capital. It's going to help you slightly in the sense that you won't have to build as many markets or other things or upgrade as many cities in order to get the Golden Age bonus, but I don't think that this is hard to get for economics. And then gift economy, 1 golden happiness for every imported resource. If you're leaning into like if you're doing Xerxes the Achaemenid or something like this, where you have some sort of strategy that's leaning into trading a whole bunch, this can be kind of okay. But generally speaking, and as far as yields go, gold and happiness I think are generally weaker than like science and culture, and so spending a slot on this for imported resources that isn't going to scale all that well. I don't think you're ever importing anywhere near as many resources as you're getting like gold adjacencies from this, for example. I think that this is not going to be that good, and so when it comes down to it, most of the advantage you're getting is getting a higher population, and that higher population in terms of what you can translate into the next stage, I think is generally pretty weak. So coming back into the browser, we are going to put the Mississippians into C tier. They're definitely solid, and they're definitely operable. You can use a lot of different civs with them if you'd like, but I think that they fail to get some of the better yields and fail to scale in a way that the civs that are better than them are, and also I just think that food kind of falls off. But I do think that the advantages they have in production and gold set them apart from Khmer, and they are significantly better than Khmer, so we'll have them here in C tier. Alright, so next up is Persia, and I think Persia probably suffers from the deity difficulty on average more than other civilizations because they're an expansion-oriented civ. They are good at getting a lot of cities, but where they suffer is they kind of, their benefits are tied towards taking other people's cities, and simultaneously they don't really have that strong combat advantages to really help enable that, and so as a result I think they just generally kind of suffer. They're pretty good with both gold and culture though. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at Persia here. So coming in, you can see that right off the bat, their combat advantage is conditional. Generally speaking, kind of don't like conditional combat advantages, +3 strength when attacking, and plus production towards constructing Gate of All Nations. If you can get Gate of All Nations, you'll have a little bit more general combat advantage because you will have a little bit extra, war support. And next up we have the Immortal. And the Immortal is just a kind of win more unit, I think. If you are killing enemy units, it heals extra health. If you're killing enemy units, generally you're making progress anyways, if you are killing them and not getting returned killed. And it feels really good if you're just like running through, but if it feels anywhere near stalemate or close, the heals extra 15 generally feels pretty weak. But there's a secondary reason why we don't really like the Immortal too much, and that is the Immortal doesn't get unlocked until you get bronze working. So you are stuck with warriors until you unlock bronze working, and I think that that is a really substantive disadvantage because you don't have an opportunity to really try and push something else. Now you can get a lot of combat strength stacked up. You can see here we're playing as Xerxes, where we're getting +3, but during this run, it just felt so remarkably inconsistent because we would just get clapped when on defense. And so I really don't like the conditional combat strength when there are other civs like Rome and Greece that just have general combat strength that you can unlock that takes more to enable and is smaller than 3, just like generically, but ends up scaling way better. And so, really not a huge fan overall. We have the unique commander, starts with the initiative promotion. This kind of transitions kind of well in the sense that you're going to have a commander that has an extra promotion, and your commanders transition to the next stage, so this is something, but this isn't crazy. The best probably is the Parideza, which is going to give +1 culture and +1 gold. Just, that's what it gives, and it has the feature where it cannot be placed next to another one, but generally speaking, I actually think this is pretty good. It's very construction efficient. You can put it on top of mines. It's a little bit more flexible in where you can place it, and culture and gold scale better than, like, let's say the Pak Top, where you have to be going food specifically. And so I do think that this is one of the better aspects of Persia, is going to be that. Let's take a closer look at the civics, which is going to have the other kind of good advantage of them is going to be in here. Let's take a look. -1 maintenance for units. This is not going to generate you that much gold over the course of time, unless you start really spamming units. We also have +50% production towards training infantry units. Now, I am willing to accept that I could be just radically wrong in the way you're supposed to play Persia, and maybe you're supposed to, as Persia, go oligarchy, stack those production towards training infantry units when you have a celebration, and just get +100%, and just really churn out infantry units, and that this is a way better advantage than I think it is. But generally speaking, with the way that I have played so far, I'm not spending a lot of turns worth of production in the aggregate relative to all my production turns for the Antiquity Age on infantry units, and generally speaking, the more time I'm spending on infantry units building them, the worse my run is probably going. I don't think the infantry units really super push the needle, and by the time you get your unique infantry unit, the enemy is going to have cavalry, and cavalry does well against the unique infantry unit, and so it's not your combat strength against deity, because they're getting +8, is really, really rough. I think you could run over the AI on easier speeds or easier difficulties, but the 8 combat is like a lot to overcome, and you don't get to overcome it as Persia, and so it feels like you're really fighting uphill, and you don't get to have this like rolling snowball that Persia might feel like in multiplayer. I don't really know. We get +3 gold on every town. This is a really weak tradition because you, generally speaking, don't want to have a lot of towns, but early on it can be quite good if you are looking to go for satrapies relatively early. This has virtually no scaling into like later ages. I guess it's fine at the start of exploration if you don't use the Golden Age to retain all your cities as cities. Up here we have the Parideza, gives +1 happiness from adjacent quarters. And +1 settlement limit. This +1 settlement limit, keep this in mind, because coming over here, we are going to get 5 extra gold for every different civilization you have captured a settlement from. This is something that is win more-ish. If you're capturing, I would rather have a bonus that enables me to capture an enemy settlement than something that gets me a benefit from already having captured it, right? This doesn't help you capture anything. The thing that is most helpful is the production speed, but if you're going this, you're foregoing building buildings, you're foregoing building various other things that can help you scale, and so not getting scaling in that way is like not ideal unless you take a lot of cities. But if you're in order to take a lot of I don't think that there's just not enough strength here to really be able to push deity around. But coming here on the mastery, we were keeping in mind the +1 settlement limit. You do get a 2+2 settlement limit in total from Persia. So the additional settlement limit is pretty nice, and that's one of the better things. And also +3 combat strength for units in enemy territory. Not a huge fan of this being conditional, but Shahanshah is going to be decent. I think it's going to be very strong in multiplayer, but +3 combat strength is going to be pretty nice. I think I prefer the Aztecs one slightly, plus combat strength against damage units, but it's kind of a similar type of vibe. 3 combat strength is going to be a decently transitioning tradition, but that's kind of the only one that feels good in subsequent ages, or in some spots kind of the Engardium, but I think that if you're producing units like in the modern age, producing infantry is like, we're not going to be doing that. So, because the military victory is like one of the worst ones to go for. So, coming back into the browser, in terms of where we are going to put Persia, we're actually going to put it behind Khmer, and it will have the inglorious distinction of being, in my opinion, the worst civilization in Civ 7 at this point in time. Alright, next up, we are going to have Rome. Now, Rome is actually, unlike Persia, getting a ton of strong advantages for conducting military. They probably, while they don't have the strongest military unit, I think they overall have the strongest military in terms of what they can do. And so let's take a little bit of a closer look. They'll also have decent scaling from their unique building. So taking a closer look at some of the advantages that they receive here, we do see that they get +1 culture on the districts of the capital and in city centers and towns. This means at the very outset, you will be getting +1 culture. This is pretty nice at the very game start, because instead of 10, you'll be getting 11, but also you will have more towns, at least initially. Now, they don't have really too much assistance to be able to upgrade to cities, so to that extent, your transition will be a little bit worse on that front specifically, but you can have more towns, so the towns can help feed, because they actually have an extra settlement limit relative to most of the civs. But let's kind of continue on. Extra production towards constructing the Colosseum. Colosseum's a pretty strong wonder, so that is going to be something we're generally a fan of. And the Legion, the Roman unique infantry unit, +2 combat strength for every tradition in the government. If I'm not mistaken, they have 4 total traditions, meaning you can consistently get +8 combat strength on the Legion, completely overcoming the penalty that you receive from being on the deity difficulty, allowing you to actually make progress and to push. On top of that, you do have the Legatus, which will be your army commander. They will get a free promotion later from their civics, but also they can gain 1 charge to create a new settlement for every 3 levels it has. Now, I'm kind of the opinion that you probably want to go for the food bloom into the 5, size settlement, into building 2 settlers right away anyways, but there is maybe some argument for some sort of metagame where you instead push for an early legatus and try and rumble dispersing city-states, because you can actually fight those, or independent nations, and then use that experience that you got from that in order to found your settlements and to push your settlements and this type of thing. If you did that, you would maybe be opening with like a culture bloom, where you go the extra cultural civic plus 50 culture whenever you use a extra attribute point, or whenever you receive an attribute point. You go these 2 paired together, you get an early legatus, and you try and push around and do a bunch of combats to be able to get to level 3, and then you use that to found at least one of your cities. Maybe there's a strategy in here on that realm, and it's an interesting unit to think about. Not really tested, but this is a very unique type of thing. But also, if you have 2 legatuses, right, and you've been working and doing a lot of combats, you can also do last-minute settlements wherever your legatuses are, and also gain a bunch of movement speed on them, right, by promoting in the movement speed path, or the path that gives movement speed for packed armies. And so from a maneuvering and, like, ending the age with a couple cheeky settles where you're going way over the settlement limit, I do think that Legatus helps to enable this. And so there's a lot kind of going on here with this ability to settle with having 3 levels on your commander. Next up, we have a very solid unique district. It is going to get plus culture and gold for every unique tradition in the government, and so you are going to be able to get quite a bit of yields off of that. Nothing too crazy, but its base yields of gold and happiness, not the best base yields, but its adjacencies are really good. We have a culture adjacency, and I think this is the only influence adjacency in Antiquity, adjacency for cultural buildings and wonders. You're going to be able to build a few wonders, basilica up, and then generate a decent amount of influence. If you have an influence related strategy, Rome might be the 3rd best at executing those, and so that is something to write home around. But what it's really going to bring to the table is going to be being able to go really wide. This was one of our very first games here on this Rome run, but let's take a closer look at the civics. Taking a look at the civics, we have unlocking the building and 5% production towards military in the units of the capital for every town. Not the best scaling, but early on, this can represent quite a lot of production. If you wanted to push a certain timing window or this type of thing, it's probably better multiplayer than single player. The Legatus gains the Bulwark for promotion for free. I believe this counts towards his levels. I'm not 100% sure on this. If it doesn't, then it's not going to be faster settles. If it does, then it is going to be faster settles. But also, the Bulwark promotion is a fairly solid one, and if you want to go the defensive tree, it will be good by allowing you to finish out that tree faster. Next up, we have Civica Romanes, which is going to unlock the Basilica, and also training an infantry unit grants culture equal to 25% of its production cost. This is pretty hard to evaluate, but this is going to make it so if you slot this in, this is better than turning your production into culture just generically because you get units on top of it. It's a curious one. I think that this one kind of scales okay if you are going to be building infantry units or something like this. Shawnee in particular comes to mind. I do believe that's the second age or the exploration age, Loud Car Outside, where their civ has a really strong infantry unit that is available at game start or at age start, and so maybe there's a type of thing where on age transition you don't have the best options in terms of buildings to build. You don't have a lot of culture, buildings already ramped up, and this can generate you a decent amount of culture because you still might have a decent amount of production, something like this. +2 gold in the capital for every town you own. Now, generally speaking, we want to make cities, so this kind of has a little bit of a downside, but in terms of you upgrading or waiting till later on to upgrade your cities, this is going to generate you a decent amount of gold in the turns 20 to 70 or 20 to 60. This is going to be generating you a decent chunk of gold, and it doesn't require any sort of investment other than researching it, although that is a significant enough investment. But if you go a culture bloom or a culture oriented start, this could be enabled a little bit earlier. Here we have a Legatus, of course, the culture start enabled by the fact that you maybe don't need to build the settlers to do the settlements. But Legatus Praetor, I think it's just Praetor, gain a free infantry unit in settlements that you found. This is going to allow you to start snowballing, and also +1 settlement limit. The Latinitas kind of scales okay, in that it's giving food, gold, and culture in towns with a specialization. In particular, if you have a town working a natural wonder, it's kind of okay, but probably would rather generally turn them into cities. It doesn't require that you have a specific specialization, which is quite nice, so you don't need a food specialization to push out extra food, and you don't need a gold one to push out extra gold. But generally speaking, I think that growing the towns is going to be better than turning them into specialized towns, as long as they're growing at a decent clip. And if they're not growing at a decent clip, I think they're better as cities. So generally speaking, I don't think this scales that well. If they ever buff towns or the way food scales, this will get a lot better. The way food scales right now, it's exponential in cost for marginal growth events, and so we've kind of talked about it a little bit so far, but extra food in terms of a multiplier value, this 10%, doesn't really push the needle in terms of how much pop you're going to have when you eventually hit an equilibrium. Finally, we have the Senatoris Propulsque Romanus, which will give us an additional settlement limit, which is quite nice. Also going to be getting a social policy slot. The social policy slot brings to mind Lafayette as well. I think that Rome actually has a lot of interesting synergies with guys like Lafayette, and so this is going to be particularly strong. Also Augustus, who we played this run with, they have the low amount of cities synergizes with Augustus. The Roman Legionnaire gaining a bunch of combat from having tradition slotted in synergizes with Lafayette. I think Lafayette Rome is probably really spooky in multiplayer. Also gains plus production on urban districts in your capital. Now, I think that this is kind of okay in Antiquity and probably good at the beginning of Exploration, or okay-ish, especially if you don't have a lot of cities, but overall this doesn't seem that strong. So overall, you know, not that powerful in terms of what you're getting in terms of long-term traditions, but where your power is going to be the fact that you are going to have a bunch of settlements, and then you are going to be able to... I'm kind of convincing myself maybe these guys belong a little bit lower. Okay, I sat down, I continued to have a little bit of a think about it, and I'm a little bit on the fence, but I'm a little bit on the fence in terms of where it belongs. In the same way, I'm a little bit on the fence with where Maruya belongs, because I think that they're very close to Rome, but like right on the cusp of each other. But I think we're going to put Rome just slightly ahead of Maruya with a somewhat like low degree of confidence. I think there's a lot of interesting and weird things going on with Rome specifically, and that Aksum is quite a bit far ahead of Rome, but Rome is going to be a little bit better than Maruya, but just slightly. The thing is I do think that they have the best military potential overall, but maybe we move them down to the top of B tier here and have a little bit more of a polarized, or less polarized rather, more of a condensed kind of tier list here. I do think it's close. I think you could put Rome and Maruya either in B or A tier here, and so I'm really not sure where they belong quite exactly. I do think, yeah, I just think that these two are like close, and they both could be either in A tier or B tier, I think. So we're gonna put them both in B tier, maybe a little bit. The fact that, well, Rome is really good at specifically getting Pax Imperatoria legacy, which I think is reasonably hard to get, but the lack of good traditions and the fact that your building is just kind of middling, I think maybe puts it into B tier. And in terms of the total rating value we had, it was really close to Maruya, so unless we do something else, it feels wrong to have them in a separate position, because they basically have the same score. So I think we're going to put them both in B tier after quite a bit of waffling here. Alright, and finally we have Carthage. Now, in terms of countries that I have a hard time evaluating, there was Han, which is hard to evaluate because my very first run was on Han, and we haven't played it since, and Carthage, because Carthage has this incredibly strange bonus in that, or malice in that, they cannot turn any other towns into settlements, but at the same time, they have a ton of other things going for them in exchange, and it's really hard to gauge how this is, or how good this is. I think Carthage is insanely powerful. In the first 2/3 of Antiquity, they have a little bit of transitional strength, but overall they are really weak in terms of their value in transitioning into the exploration age, other than they can dictate the pace of the map because they can get their settlements so quickly. They can dictate the pace of the map and which resources you're going to have control of, and various other things, and so you can go triple settler on Carthage easier and not fall behind rather relative to scout settler, but at the same time you're kind of a little bit vulnerable to really bad rolls from your map, because your unique buildings and where you want to place them are a constraint, and so making sure you have enough settlements on or near coast is going to be a very significant factor. So let's jump into taking a closer look at Carthage. We've looked at Carthage pretty extensively in terms of doing several different starts with Carthage, but let's take a closer look at this one specifically. Also, I just want to point out this run really quick. I think it was a relatively high roll, but the level of like settlement control and degree to which we have held back the AI in terms of this run is just absolutely insane, and we just have almost every single one of our settlements is on the coast and is benefiting from this. And so this is, I think, what a high roll looks like. I don't think you would consistently hit this, but let's take a look here in terms of what we are getting off of Carthage. Can only have one city. Towns cannot convert to city. Receives a second merchant and colonist every time you create one. So you will receive double settlers and double scouts. This is the price that you pay for it, is that you can only make one city. Now, obviously, at any point in time before you would be making your second city, this is going to be wildly better. right? This is going to be extremely powerful. And so, but then it starts to fall off. I still think Carthage is going to be stronger than someone who's on 2 cities, but once you start hitting 3 and 4 cities, the real problem is that Carthage isn't going to have buildings with which to transition into the next age on, except the ones you have purchased. To that end, we've paired with Augustus, and I think that Augustus is going to be one of the stronger pairings for Carthage, because it gets production in the capital for every town. You're forced to stay everything else on a town. This is going to be quite powerful. If you don't use Augustus, you can always use the one that is going to give you plus production per town in terms of the memento. We don't have it slotted now because we played Augustus, but it can also purchase culture, buildings, and towns. This gives you more option, and 50% gold towards purchasing buildings and towns. This is the way you get buildings and towns. This is probably who you want to play as, and I don't think it's all that flexible. I think pretty unambiguously Augustus is going to be better. But getting into down here, I think that Carthage has the strongest unique unit in Antiquity. And they don't get it until a little bit later. It is gated behind research, but it can be purchased. It can only be purchased. It is more expensive to purchase. This is going to make anything that helps you purchase units, like the silver resource, a bit better, but it gets +1 combat strength for each unique city resource assigned to your capital. It also ignores zone of control, but the unique ones that are in the capital, that doesn't, it counts duplicates. The way that it counts, I don't know if this is a bug. You can get a whole ton of slots in the capital, but you see here we have in the capital in this run 5. It's even difficult to count 10, 15, 19, 20, 21, 22. We could get +22 combat strength, basically with no additional investment from our leader or mementos, as long as we can slot in that many resources in the capital. That is absolutely bananas. That is an insane level of combat strength. Again, you can't get it until you unlock them, so it's not like you can push the combat really early unless you did some sort of tech push for getting to the Numidian cavalry as quickly as possible. But I think you could play Charlemagne with Carthage as well. Every time you have a celebration, you get you get 2 additional units. These units are more expensive to buy, so getting free versions of the units is very strong. And so I think that there's maybe some strategies around that. I think that they're going to be an absolute nightmare in multiplayer, because they're going to get the settlers really fast, settle the good cities, and then if you don't deal with them between the window where they got all the more yields than you because they settled fast cities, they're going to get Numidian cavalry. And I think that generally in multiplayer probably is the case, that upgrading to cities is way less meta, because it takes a while to recoup the value of an upgrade to a city. Not as much on the 2nd and 3rd city, but really after that it takes quite a bit, and Carthage isn't going to be suffering that cost. Instead, they're going to be buying units and buildings and this type of stuff. We also have the colonist. It gets a bunch of extra embarked movement speed, or +1, and it also gains an extra population if it's settled next to a resource. It's pretty nice, pretty quality of life, similar to the China bonus though, or the Han bonus. I don't think that the +1 pop is actually all that strong. It's just nice quality of life for locking in resources a little bit earlier. But the extra embarked movement does mean that even if you're buying out of the capital or building settlers out of the capital, which you can just buy them elsewhere, your ability to just kind of sail around the edge of the map and then settle somewhere else is pretty high. This is definitely something that you have going on. Next up, we have the Punic port. Now, the Punic port is a little bit weird. It's a little bit interesting. You can slot extra resources, you get +2. Now, with this, it makes it really easy to get the economic golden age, because the settlements can slot in a bunch of resources. Fine, fair enough. Also important to have in the capital, because your capital is the only city that can slot city-only buildings. Shout out to this visual bug here. But overall, I don't think this scales all that well. I mean, it scales kind of well in the sense that it's going to be nice in your factory cities, but actually getting the quarter bonus beyond maybe 2 to 3 cities is not important, because you have enough slots. It's also really nice when you found a city and you buy both the Kothan and the dockyard in it, because these buildings are all buyable, which is a key point in towns. It's pretty nice to be able to slot 3 resources into a new town that have food, and then grow the town really fast. So that's really nice. It allows you to be more explosive if you've already accrued these resources like fish and stuff like this that give a bunch of food. But you don't have to put them together once you kind of get going. The other thing is, the Kothan is a really good building. The dockyard is not a very good building. And so, if you want to just build Kothans alone, you can do that. And if you want to build Kothans for their adjacency, you can do that. It gives +2 production, +3 production adjacency for the coast, navigable rivers, and wonders. It's not that hard to get a +5 Kothan. And this is, to the extent that you have a building or you have scaling into the next stage, it is having extra production in every city on the back of having a Kothan. The dockyard is not as good. It's giving food and adjacency for food. You can build these in different spots, by the way. You don't have to stack them on top of each other, because you can build this just in the best production spot you can, and then you can build this next to as many resources and districts as you can, and just shrug your shoulders and say, hey, I got the yields, bro. And this is probably the better way to play it, and only push for the quarters in specifically places where there's a loud car outside, allowing you to places where you want to eventually have a factory. And so I do think that being able to detach these two is significant, and also you maybe don't have to build the dockyard. If you're building the Kothan specifically, this will also generate you a lot of golden towns, so you kind of probably want to lock in every Kothan in a town before you build the dockyard. I was kind of the opinion that maybe the dockyard was good because pushing the food allowed you to push up the cities. Maybe contextually this is sometimes good, this type of thing. But okay, this is going to be what you are pretty good at. You are going to be pretty good at generating food, and to the extent that you are going to have production in the next stage, you're going to be good. What you're going to really struggle with is you have basically nothing for generating science or culture, and you can't get a lot of buildings in that regard. So you're going to need to probably pick up the slack with your mementos, or if you go the explosive memento slot, you'll just be shrugging your shoulders and say, okay, I guess I'll suzerain some culture guy and buy their improvements in my towns, or something like this, or some science guy and buy their improvements in my towns, and go for the improvement suzerain, which is generally kind of a worse one, but kind of taking a closer look at what we have in the terms of the civics. The extra trade sea route range, +3 in the capital for every trade route in the capital. I am unsure if this is bugged or not. If the trade route gold used to show up in the city of the in which the trade route originated, it now doesn't show up in terms of the UI in that city. I'm not sure if I'm getting this bonus on the city, in which case, if you're getting it on the city, then the jade resource is really good, the 15% juice. But if you're getting it on your nation, then it's not useful, and jade's not very good, and not anywhere near as good. But okay, not sure exactly if this is operating as intended, but let's assume it's operating as intended, and it's just 3 gold in the capital. This will scale well with Jade, and you will push everything out of the capital specifically, and you will be able to get +15% on these +3s, which will be nice, especially if you're running a ton of trade routes, which you can run more of because you get 2 traders every time you produce a trade route. Although it really increases the cost of production on the traders quite quickly, because I think it counts both of them. Here we have the Gaulos, which will give +25% gold towards purchasing buildings on coast or navigable rivers. Coast is in the water. Just to be clear, it's an in the water thing. But this is one where the scaling on this is kind of okay, but kind of not insane, which is that you're going to slot it in when you're buying on the coast or navigable rivers, and then you're going to slot it out when you're not, and it's going to feel very solid in that regard, and it's going to be pretty nice. It's not insane, it's not one you leave in, it's one you have to consider about microing, so to that degree it's annoying, but it is going to be a thing. Also increases the number of resources that may be assigned in the capital by 3. Perfect. Helps to enable the Numidian cavalry / getting a golden age in economics, which I don't think is that difficult with these guys anyways. Next up we have the Kothan. We already discussed this a little bit. Our unique wonder, the Persia, being able to produce this a little bit easier. If you're settling really aggressively on the coast and denying those settles to the AI, it's going to be harder for them to get that anyways. +1 movement to naval units. This is nice. I think that naval units in general are pretty good at controlling the map as long as there's navigable rivers involved, obviously, and the AI is just really bad at dealing with them. The AI does not know how to execute against them, and it really allows you to dominate and crush the AI if you use the boats on the rivers. The AI just does not know how to do this, and as a result of this, plus I think this is the bonus we're going to talk about, +1 range to naval units. This is insane. This prevents you from being ranged by ranged units, lets you shoot inwards, and really, in my opinion, makes Carthage pretty good for getting the legacy path for, or sorry, that's not the one. the legacy path for military. You're going to be in really good shape because you can just find a city on a river and just take that at the end of the age. And you're going to be really good at doing that with boats and Numidian cavalry combined. So that's going to be a very strong advantage. I think that the AI is just kind of really helpless against resisting those two things combined, and is going to be struggle against this. We also have 25% gold towards purchasing naval units, -1 gold maintenance. Again, this is one you can slot in and then slot out, and it will scale well when it's slot in, but it is not an always-on kind of bonus that's particularly good, but it is contextually sometimes good and sometimes worth, like if you want to just be like, okay, I want to buy 5 boats, you slot this in, you buy 5 boats, you slot it out. It's going to be especially if you have a little bit of a pivot in terms of your strategy here. You're generating a ton of gold throughout. Gold is really, really, really flexible, and then you decide you want to turn the corner and go for a war, and you buy a couple boats with this, or boats over a course of maybe 3 turns. You just go quintrireme, 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 this type of thing, and you'll be good. Next up, we have Suffets. Plus 20% gold from mining towns, plus 20% food from fishing or farming towns. I think this is just worse than the Roman one that's kind of similar to this, but just slightly worse. But the bigger part of why I don't think this is very good is because I think town metagame is not very good. So in terms of late game scaling, I don't think that this scales all that well. If you get some really nice fishing towns that you want to have in and keep fishing towns and you can't turn into regular towns because it just doesn't make sense, maybe this is kind of okay, but in general, I don't think it's that much to write home about. But the Sicilian Wars here, we are going to have +2 settlement limit, and we're going to have +2 settlement limit locked behind a kind of not too much civics required to research. And so, in particular, with Carthage, if you grab an extra settlement limit from your leader or your memento, in some way. I think we have Corona Civica +1 settlement per age, and you also research irrigation. You are going to have an insane timing window, because you're going to have +2. You're going to have your starting 3 settlement limit plus this 2. That's 5. Plus also an additional 2 from here. You're going to have 2 timing windows that are just really, really insane, where you can go for settlements 5 and 7 very easily, because every time you produce a settler, you get 2. The production cost of settlers in the early game is a big portion of your overall production, and then it scales down. And so what you're going to be able to do is you're just going to be able to go absolutely ballistic on this 5 and 7 breakpoint. And I think that the +2 settlement limit is very strong. I think that Carthage maybe needs +3 settlement limit, but maybe that's a bridge too far in terms of like making it good. But coming in down here, we are also going to have +1 movement in sight to Numidian cavalry, and +1 codex slot in city in town halls with the trade outpost focus. That is what enables you to actually get if you play properly, which isn't quite how we played this time, that is exactly how you are able to get the displays and codices to be able to golden age here. Where Carthage will really struggle with the legacy paths is you have to build 7 wonders, and you have to... I have mixed kind of reports on this. You can see we have a 7 out of 7, but we haven't gotten it. I've been told that you have to construct them yourself. If you conquer them, they will show up here in the UI. I don't know if this is them not counting, or if you can conquer one and then build one after, and then it will trigger the full golden age. I'm not 100% sure here, but in regards to the science, you can make stuff into going for, you know, the trade-oriented city. I think this one was a trade outpost, which will give you a bunch of extra happiness. Incidentally, you can pair kind of nicely with happiness-oriented stuff, like Charlemagne, who's going to give us free cavalry units by making a whole bunch of trade outposts. But also, in this instance here in Maste, what we ended up doing is we ended up taking a city that had a bunch of slots. And so in this way, you can also be able to golden age on the science as well. So you can see here, ba-boom. So coming back into the ratings here, for Carthage, we're going to put Carthage. The real problem with Carthage is that I think they transition really poorly overall. The Kothan is kind of nice, but other than that, sitting on 0 cities, I think that overall the best transition is you go Golden Age, and then you keep all your cities as cities in terms of your Golden Age spend. Carthage doesn't have that play pattern. I think they suffer for it considerably, but I also think I could just be wildly underestimating Carthage. I also do think that they are a little bit inconsistent because you kind of need the right settlement spots to really make use of their 3 settle, 5 settle, 7 settle windows. But I could be, it could just be the case that you're super okay with it. They don't have much military ability to dictate control of the map early on, other than just being able to settle faster, but I think you build more scouts with them. We're going to put them in C tier, just ahead of the Mississippians. And so this will be kind of the finalized tier list that we have, where we have in S tier, the Meier. In A tier, we have Aksum, but maybe a half-step tier, we have Rome and Maruya ahead of the other two in B tier, but we do have Rome and Maruya for now in B tier. We have Greece in B tier. We have Han in B tier. A little bit less confident in my Han evaluation here, but then in C tier, we have Carthage and the Mississippians. In D tier, we have Egypt, and then in the failure tier, we have the Khmer and Persia. So that's the tier list. Now, we are going to go on to the spreadsheet, but if you, again, have any children under the age of 38, please hide them in the cupboard because they won't like what they see next. So here is the spreadsheet that we have for ranking the various civilizations. You will notice this conforms exactly to what we showed on the tier list, although to some extent we had already had most of these conclusions. I think the only one that we had a little bit different in terms of where we had put them in terms of our own opinion before we did this is Maruya was ahead of Rome, but I do think it's more dependent on who you pair it with. And that was the main distinction. I think we also had Han ahead of Greece, stuff like this, but we changed it around a little. But in the end, with the weightings that we had, we ended up coming up with the same type of thing. Here we have a score that is generated from a weighted average. You can see here is the weight of this various categories here. These are the weights. If you wanted to copy the spreadsheet, you could come in and, fiddle with this and change the weight of various things. So if you wanted to have different factors be different importance, you can do that. You can also come in and change the values that we've assigned to things. Really kind of tentative in terms of how we think the value of these things with, again, our relatively small sample size, but we will discuss through some of the ideas that we had for forming this evaluation as well as the rankings here. And so we do have the overall. Everyone kind of knows where the overall is. Here, I think, is a key point here. We are looking at in-age power at total weight of 18 out of 30, and also transition power in 12 out of 18. We're not going to go over each of these because this would be a summary of each of the civilizations, but I just want to note that there are some spots where there is a sharp differential between the two of these, and I think that this is where my tier list is probably going to look a lot different than other people's tier lists. When the post age is really strong and the in age is weak, I will probably have ranked them higher than other people, and when the post age is really weak and the in age is really strong, other people would have probably ranked them higher, I assume. Mississippians, I'm not sure why their rating is maybe not higher on in age, but it's hard it's because we're weighting food relatively low, so that's probably the reason. If we had a higher food weight, things would be a little bit different. But let's kind of talk through some of the ones where there's a sharp difference. Aksum and Aksum has a lot stronger age transition than in age. I think this is because you get to end on having everything be a city. The Romans look relatively similar. The Maruyan really have the strongest traditions. That's why they transition well. Greece, I think that there's perhaps a metagame where you are going almost entirely focused on city-states. In a city-state metagame, Greece is probably unambiguously best, and so it's potentially the case that Greece is just a lot higher in terms of value. I just don't know how you're supposed to be spending influence as a matter of practice in terms of metagame, because espionage is also really good. If espionage gets nerfed, though, city-states get better. This type of thing. We have Han transitioning really well, but here we have another one where Carthage looks really bad in transition, and this is one of the reasons why I think Carthage overall is getting bopped. We just mentioned it, but this is one that's important to note. And also Persia, they kind of transition okay, but in age, really, really weak. And other than that, most of these kind of have a similar score in age and also post-age. But moving moving on to, we're going to look at explosiveness. This is how quickly they have advantages out of the gate, and in particular with a bit of an emphasis towards not just advantages out of the gate, but ability to settle. If we sort by column Z to A, we can see the best at the top and then the worst coming down. I do think Mississippian very strong. If you value explosiveness higher, this is one of the ways in which Mississippi would score higher. I think that a lot of people are going to disagree with me on Mississippi and Khmer, but you could just rank explosiveness a little bit higher or food higher, and these would perform better. Aksumite, they are getting the gold at the very start. Meier do have additional research at the start, and they have the ability to get into the research really, really fast as well, because they have some other bonus. I forget what it is. It's on their second down civic here. Han is getting the extra settles. Egypt has the ability to get great steel earlier, but also their unique district is kind of good for pushing the gold. And after that, we do fall off a little bit. In particular, Persia has like nothing that it's getting. Like Greece gets 3 influence, Persia's just kind of nothing. Next up we have map control, which is a combination of ability to like influence the map through like navy or scout the map really early and just kind of dictate where the scouting happens slash a little bit of emphasis on naval control. If we sort the column Z to A, we can see the rankings here where we have Maya having the unique, being able to control the forests better with your units, having the unique scout, and being able to, that scout also being able to put down a trap. I think it does give you a lot of control in terms of dictating where things go, and ability to completely fight and negate independent powers. The ability to suzerain independent powers is also in here. Carthage is mainly in here because of your ability to settle so quickly and to gain you deny a lot of resources when you settle quickly, and this is the method by which you have control with Carthage here. Some of these lower ones just don't get to dictate the pace of play earlier. In particular, Egypt is like, they have a combat bonus that's only when they're on their own territory, and so they're not really dictating what stuff happens as much. Although if you settle and then you buy a Magi, you can defend that really well, even if you settle in a little bit of an obscure place. And then not 100% sure why the Maruyans are scoring so low there. Next up we have military unique units. Let's take a little bit of sort Z to A here. And I think that Carthage just has the combination of getting the naval bonuses, and the Numidian cavalry is insane, although their timing window is a bit later than Rome, which has an earlier timing window and it's going to be a lot stronger. I think after that, none of them really stand out too much. I think the Tao double dipping on being a naval unit and also being a trader is really useful and for Aksum, and so this is an evaluation I think a lot of people might disagree with me on. I think the Maya, the scouts that have combat plus the strong archer is good. I think the Khmer does have a really heavy hitting unit. This is maybe a little bit, the Khmer has a heavy unit. This is maybe a little bit too high. Hoplite really strong, or relatively medium early on, but can scale really wild. Mississippian have the strongest archer unit, and then it's kind of a lot less to write home about. Next up, we have consistency. I think that a lot of these civs are like wildly inconsistent. I guess we'll just talk about maybe some of the ones at the polls. I do think getting the gold really early is very good. I think that no matter what you do on Maya, they're just going to be very strong. Maybe they should score slower on consistency. One of the difficulties with scoring for Maya is that I think that I should be able to put more than an 8 for a score on something when it comes to their unique building. Like, it should just be a 15 or something. It's just kind of an absurdity. But, okay. And then I also think the Romans will be very consistent. You settle a city, you get a unit. You can use your general to settle cities, and so it's harder to get gummed up in a build order where you don't get to settle cities as fast as Romans. And the Mississippians are very explosive. Persians, some of their bonuses are locked behind you doing well, rather than helping you do well. And then Greeks are really dependent on city-state / other rulers that, or other leaders that get rolled. If you roll people like Himiko that are going to compete with you, they're going to suffer. Kumai is dependent on settling on rivers. Carthage is dependent on being able to settle on the coast. taking a look at flexibility, this is an indication of how easy it is for you to deviate from what's meta in terms of your ability to support yourself. Generally, people with good food will do well, and Carthage will do well, because I think that other than that, you're going to be doing the food bloom start, generally speaking, and so we will have good scores for those. And then countries that are kind of looking for a specific leader are going to generally score a little bit lower. Persia, for example, has to try and figure something out in terms of military. Egypt is going to... I don't know why Egypt's so low here, but generally speaking, I mean, Egypt is maybe less flexible, but like has no synergy towards other things. I think this is partially because the Magi doesn't have a bonus outside of their territory, and so you just like have to play defense and go for wonders, and this type of thing. The Maruyan, I think and Greek, you're kind of forced onto your advantage a little bit, so we reduce flexibility. I think really to get the most out of them, you have to be going city-states with Greece, you have to be going happiness with Maruyans. Next up, we have a synergy bonus, which is kind of an inversion of flexibility, but something's worth noting. I think that it is the ones that are scoring high on these combined values that are just going to be overall like the more synergy dependent you are, the less flexible you're going to be here, right? And so looking at these two values combined, I think is maybe a good way to think about it. But we're going to have, generally speaking, a lot are not synergy, are not going to have a ton of synergy. To be fair, this is with a low sample size where we haven't discovered a whole bunch of synergies. Maya is not going to be very synergy oriented because it's just good with everything, this type of thing in terms of how it feels. But Maruyans just absolutely ace synergy in terms of the happiness, just slam dunk. And then the Greeks. And then Romans, I think Lafayette pairing is particularly strong, but any pairing where you are utilizing the fact that you have the strongest military early on is going to be really nice, especially multiplayer. Next up, we have kind of these 5 categories all together or not 5. We have from food to influence. I think that this is relatively self-explanatory in terms of your ability to get these yields. I think the only one that is maybe going to raise some eyebrows is the Maruyan, where you have a little bit of extra value in everything. That's because we're assuming the altar is going to get a little bit more value and is going to be a little bit nicer. And so it kind of juiced up everything, but in especially speaking happiness, we're just going to sort these and just take a quick look at what things are, but we're not going to comment too much on it. Generally speaking, if you have 0 bonuses in a sphere, you'll get a 0, and then if you kind of scales with how good your bonuses are. The production is probably the rarest thing to actually have any type of bonus on, and so I think that that's maybe worth noting. The Kothin is kind of the only one, and then there's the obscene Mayan building, which is just or unique quarter rather. Science is also a little bit rare, and I think that there is a little bit of adjacencies in science in terms of a few of these that maybe we should put in here, actually. So that I believe that Romans have a science adjacency on their unique quarter. We'll take another look at the unique buildings a little bit and maybe adjust some of these science values and reorient these if needed be. But we're going to keep the tier list how it is. Coming in, we're going to sort up culture. You can see that Maya are also doing really good on culture because they have culture adjacencies plus culture cards. Influence is pretty polarized in terms of most countries don't have it at all, and then some have a little bit of value in it. Maruyans benefiting from the fact that they can double altar bonus. And then the settlement limit is going to be one where if you have 1 settlement limit, you're going to be 4, and if you have 2, you're going to be 7, and if you have 5 or 8, it means that you have the settlement limit 1 under that, plus you, in terms of a timing window, have a better timing window or get it earlier. So Han and Maruyan, for example, have an extra settlement limit, but they get it really early. Next up, we have our scaling category here, which is going to be kind of a little bit difficult to rate these types of things. But for transition, we are saying how good are they turn 1 when you enter the next age, and this is going to be, generally speaking, if you are food oriented, you're going to score a little bit higher on this because you can deliver higher pop stuff, and if you are gold oriented, you're going to score a little bit higher because it's assumed you get more cities, and you use the ability to transition with maintaining things as cities. We see Aksumite gets the best scoring. Romans are going to have benefit of more cities in terms of, you know, having the extra settle limit, and then we have the Mississippians, who I think can deliver really strong from the perspective of, you know, having a bunch of pops. Khmer is also up here, and then at the bottom we have Carthaginian, because you are only delivering one city to the next stage. Although you're delivering a bunch of Cothans, you're gonna have to pay to upgrade them. Maybe we're being a little bit mean to Carthage here. Maybe it's not that big a deal. We still need to test the age transition on Carthage, so that's a little bit of a confound. And so we haven't played Exploration Age from a Carthage start. Coming in here, we have potential, and this is how well, as a result of what you got in that age, are you going to scale? And if you scored high in transition because of food reasons, you're going to have low potential. If you scored high for any other reason, this isn't going to negatively affect your potential. And so we're going to kind of sort in here, and we're going to see Greeks. I think that the scaling of getting a bunch of city-states that you're suzerain of, boosting them, protecting them, this type of stuff, I think that probably scales ridiculously well. And so that's why we have Greeks here at 7. Maruyans, I think, have the very best traditions. Meier, they have the absurd building. And then kind of coming back here on the other side, Khmer, they're not going to get like anything useful out of, it's just a bunch of food, and so it's like negative scaling. Egyptians, we already kind of talked about when we talked about Egypt, but in particular they encourage you to work navigable rivers, and then navigable rivers are generally not going to be as good. If they're flooded, they kind of get okay, but they're not generally pushing production as much, and so it's a little bit rough. And also the number of tiles that are worked in your city that are navigable, or in your nation that are navigable rivers, is going to proportionally decrease over time, just as the nature of things and how things go. And a lot of these just don't have anything going on for you in later ages as much. So that's what we have going on. Next category we have is legacy ease, and this is, generally speaking, we started with a value of 4 for this, and so you see a lot of stuff is not too deviated from 4, and then we gave plus points to the extent that they were really good at fulfilling certain legacy paths, and minus points if they were particularly bad at getting some legacy paths and this type of thing. And so you'll see kind of tight, a little bit of category. The combination of both having a bunch of production and having culture, pretty good for the Maya here. Romans are really good for accomplishing the legacy path of, the military one, plus they do have a little bit of culture going on. Generally speaking, we have more of a weight towards the military and cultural paths, because I think those are the two difficult paths, and the other two are kind of a bit easier to accomplish a golden age in. So those are getting much less weight in terms of the consideration. And we initially made this category to kind of give Egypt something, because I think that Egypt really does have a very strong advantage for the cultural path specifically, but that's kind of what they have going on. Next up, we have buildings. This is what you're going to get to transition into the next age in terms of how good those buildings are going to scale in the subsequent ages. The Roman buildings get you decent yields. I think that the Persian building is pretty good. The Greek building is pretty solid. All of these are just kind of even level of solid. I felt a really hard time differentiating them. My building is insane. Khmer building is just like horrible scaling. And then Egypt is the worst quarter building. And then generally, I think the quarter buildings are a little bit better than the improvement buildings. And then if we take a look at traditions, kind of a pretty nice like rainbow and different spread. This is how good I thought the traditions were scaling into subsequent ages, and were, a point of this. Also all across, this is just the weight of all these things, just to make it clear. And so it is worth 1.5 times the value, it's worth 50% more value to have a good score in potential than it is with legacy ease, but to some extent, legacy ease and traditions and buildings are informing these other two, so it should be a little bit more split. But let's kind of sort this at the back here. If you wanted to copy this again, you should be able to both change the values that I've assigned in things, change the categories, change the weightings of the categories, and do this to your liking if you so choose. I think that the only thing that's really warped by this scoring system is that Meier should have like above 8, which for us was double S tier, in terms of S tier for a 7, A for a 6, etc., etc. 8 is double S. So I think they have the most double S's with 2, or actually Maruya and Aksum both have 2. And so that's those are kind of pushing them up in terms of the average, but we would give more than an 8 for Maya specifically. But I think that'll be it. This has been our tier list slash rating Excel spreadsheet. If you liked, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. These all do help out, help the channel, this type of stuff. If you felt that I got stuff super wrong or forgot something or something to this effect in the tier list, we're going to be updating this pretty aggressively every time we complete a run with any of these civilizations, and so please feel free to let me know as we come to like some kind of appreciate some of these more. I expect to see some shifting of the sands. In particular, I'm very not confident in my assessment of these 3 that are all together here. Especially, mainly because people are so bullish on Mississippians that I've seen, but I just think that they're wrong. Yeah, feel free to let me know in the comments. Also, the notification bell and that type of thing. If you want to see more tier lists for specific things, please feel free to put that in the comments as well. I will generally probably, if there's an overwhelming desire for a particular thing or it's upvoted a lot, I will probably look to be doing that. And other than all that, you know, kind of stuff at the end, have a good day.